Sometimes that depends on the field and how fast research moves in the field. But you really need to kind of just use your own best judgment on that. However, I will say that if all of your resources are from like the 1980s, people are going to ask if you just stopped doing any reading, back when Nirvana dropped Nevermind. That also means that staying current in the research is important. Usually it's a good idea to identify the major journals in the field. These are usually part of the flagship professional organizations, things like NACADA for academic advising, or the ACA for counseling, American Educational Research Association. So there are a lot of different organizations, and depending on what you're specifically studying, usually there's an organization for that and a journal associated with it. So once you've found the major journals in your field, it's usually a good idea to go back and review the journal, review all the research that has been published by that journal for the last, I would say 5 to 10 years is usually a pretty safe bet, and that'll keep you current. I might not be interested in every article that's published in the journal, but I can at least review the titles of the journal articles really quickly to see what kind of topics are being addressed by these articles. And if I'm interested in one, I might read a little further, right? I might look at the abstract first of all to make sure it's actually talking about something that I'm interested in. And then if I'm really, really interested in that topic, I might read further through the entire article. And so you can actually review quite a bit of literature really quickly by just scanning through the titles until you find the articles that address specifically what your research topic is going to be. And if you can do it that way for, let's say, 3 or 4 different journals related to the field, then I think you'd have a pretty good idea of what the current conversations are in that field. And that's a pretty good systematic process for getting a literature review done. It's also important to keep in mind that a literature review is not a book report. It's not about reading an article and then summarizing it and then going on to the next article and summarizing that one and so on and so on. Journal editors generally aren't going to be very impressed with that. Rather, they want you to be able to synthesize the information you're finding in these different articles in order to produce a coherent argument for your own research. The readers are going to be interested in what you think and how you've arrived at your positions. If they want to read the source material or the source articles, that's why you have a list of references. They can go back and look them up and read them for themselves. You don't need to summarize them for them. Your job is to weave together all these different strands into this coherent kind of argument and justification for your own project. So let's talk about academic sources. Look, I like Wikipedia. Anytime I want to just know something quickly, Wikipedia is usually the first source I'll turn to. And I probably shouldn't tell you how much time I spend looking up just random things like colony collapse disorder or the political history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's a lot. But maybe one day I'll be on Jeopardy and I'll be playing for like $1 million and something will come up that I've looked up on Wikipedia. So it's not an entire waste, right? I hope. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to academic rigor, Wikipedia is actually considered fairly poor. And the reason is that anybody with an internet connection can log in at any time and write whatever they want to write on Wikipedia. It's open source. So Wikipedia is not really a great source. Just whatever turns up on Google. Google's not really a great search engine for academic research. And definitely those sketchy sites that your cousin keeps posting on Facebook, those aren't really great sites for research either. So when you're doing a literature review, there's actually a hierarchy of sources that you'll want to be aware of. And I'm going to put a list here and sort of show you. Okay, so we've talked about lit review. Now let's sort of switch track back to research questions. And I know we talked about it last time. We're going to get a little bit more in depth with it this time. The text gets really complicated about research problems and questions and purposes and hypotheses and all of that stuff. I mean, they really kind of make a mess of it, I think. I want to try and make it a little bit less confusing. So let me give you the basic structure for doing a quantitative research question. We're going to come back to qualitative later, but this is sort of a template that you can use for structuring your quantitative questions. Basically, when you're doing quantitative research, you're asking, what is the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable? Keywords that would clue you into the fact that you're dealing with a quantitative question might include things like affect. How does the independent variable affect the dependent variable? What is the effect on the dependent variable? Increase or decrease, influence, impact. It's always some sort of verb. What is the independent variable doing to the dependent variable? Quantitative questions are going to be closed-ended. They're going to be answered by yes or no, or maybe some kind of specific figure, like
how many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man?
They involve some kind of measurement or counting, so either through categorical or continuous variables, if you remember from last time. And they always involve some kind of comparison between things. So generally they call it a between groups comparison or a within groups comparison, but there's always some kind of comparison involved. So let me give you some examples of quantitative research questions that you might come across. What is the influence of mindfulness practices on disciplinary referrals in elementary schools? Do awareness campaigns increase student utilization of online academic advising resources? Is an emphasis on microskills training effective in developing competent school counselors? Just to give you kind of a really quick comparison, we'll come back to this again later in the course, but qualitative research questions are phrased differently. They're structured, what is the experience of X phenomenon for Y people, or what is the process of doing X behavior for Y people, or what is the meaning of X phenomenon for Y people. So meaning, process, experience, those kinds of things. They're not designed to be answered by a single response, but to expand our understanding of the phenomenon in sort of a rich descriptive way. Qualitative questions require sort of an in-depth exploration of the lived experience of participants. Since qualitative research assumes that people are more or less unique and kind of dynamic, they're not going to make a lot of comparisons between groups or anything like that, and they're definitely not going to use any kind of statistical analysis. Hopefully you can see the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. For some reason, when students have read the text in the past, they come away with this idea that qualitative research questions are just a more vague way of asking your quantitative research, which obviously is not true. Always remember, quantitative and qualitative are not just two different ways of doing research, but they're two different ways of thinking about doing research. And that means that they're going to ask very different kinds of questions. Okay, so in quantitative research, after we ask a research question, we tend to generate hypotheses. Qualitative researchers, on the other hand, are not interested in hypotheses. They're more into open-ended exploration. So this is specifically for quantitative research. The hypothesis is a clear statement of your criteria for determining a conclusion from your results. So in one of the earlier examples, we were asking, is there a relationship between awareness campaigns and student utilization of online academic advising resources? There are two possible answers to this question. One, yes there is, or two, no there isn't. Now we're going to start with a default assumption, which we call the null hypothesis. It's commonly noted as H0. The null hypothesis is a statement of the status quo. It's what we would expect if no relationship exists. And the reason it's the default is, as we were talking about last time, the need for falsifiability. I asked you to prove to me conclusively that you've never been an axe murderer and it's not something that you can do. We assume that there's no relationship until we can find evidence that one exists. So in our example, our null hypothesis is that student awareness campaigns will have no effect on whether students are using online resources for academic advising. The alternative hypothesis, on the other hand, this one's commonly noted as H1, is logically stating what we would expect to find if there is a relationship between the variables. It's an alternative to the null hypothesis. This is what we need to see in our results in order to reject the null and accept the alternative. Or you might state it another way, this is what we need to see to assume that there's a relationship between the independent variable and dependent variable. In our case, the alternative hypothesis might be that following the implementation of student awareness campaigns on campus, we'd see an increase in student utilization of online resources for academic advising. Now that we've stated the hypotheses for this research question, we have a clear set of guidelines for determining what the results mean after we collect the data. If we see an increase in students utilizing online resources, then we can reject the null and state there's a relationship between that utilization and the awareness campaigns, which was the independent variable. On the other hand, if we find that there was no increase and everything just kind of stayed the same, then we could probably conclude that the campaign never really had any effect on student utilization.